This video goes over the formulas that are for Chapter 7. So risk ratio, risk, odds ratio, odds, all of those things. We're going to use the same example where we have people, bank managers, who are given a folder with either a female or a male name, and they were asked whether that person should be promoted or not. So the first formula, pretty easy, is percentage. So if we're going to do the percentage of men who are promoted, we're going to take the number of men who were promoted and put it over the total number of men. And then we're going to convert that to a percent. Proportion, probability, and risk are all just the decimal form. So the proportion of men promoted, the risk a man was promoted, probability a man was promoted, all of those are just the decimal form. So the number over the total. Odds is a little bit weirder. So in the odds, you take the number who were promoted, and then you're comparing it to the number that were not promoted. Now, when you put the answers in for the book, it's going to want it in a form that's like 20 to 4. Like with the word 2. So like 20, the number with a space, and then 2, and then a space, and then 4. I don't know why. And then in the book, it tells you to reduce the fraction and put it against 1. So I would do the number with the trait over the number without the trait. So promoted over not promoted. That's 20 over 4 or 5. And then I would write the word 2, 1. Another thing we can do is look at relative risk. So far we've only looked at the male group. Now we're going to compare the male group to the female group. So we can see that the risk a man was promoted, or the probability, or the proportion, is 0.833, and the risk a woman was promoted is 0.591. To find the relative risk, we put the risk for one group over the risk for another group. It is way easier to do if you take the larger number and you put it over the smaller number. So I'm going to put the man over the woman, and I get 1.41. So this lets us give it a much easier interpretation than if we put the smaller over the larger. It's not wrong, it's just more difficult. We can say here that the risk of promotion for men is 1.41 times the risk of promotion for women. If the chance that men and women were promoted were equal, then the relative risk is going to be 1. So it's just something to keep in mind if we're looking at a paper. 1 is when they're equal. If the number is bigger than 1, then the top group has a bigger chance. If the number is smaller than 1, then the bottom group has a bigger chance. Another way we can look at this is the increased risk. And this is just a different way to look at relative risk. For increased risk, we're going to take the relative risk, we're going to subtract 1, and we're going to multiply by 100. So we've basically converted it into a percent. So the way we would interpret this is to say that men have a risk of being promoted that is 41% higher than that of women. The last thing you might have to do is calculate an odds ratio. In an odds ratio, you take the odds for the group 1 and you just put it over the odds for group 2. Odds ratios are weird. So in this case, we have 20 over 4 for the men, right? Promoted over not promoted. And then for women, it was 13 over 19. So in this case, I'd say the odds of promotion were 3.46 times higher for the men than they were for the women.